There it is. Hello, this is Tim coming to you from an undisclosed location. We're still reading The Utopia of Rules, David Graeber, and I'm trying to do a course on his other book, Bullshit Jobs. It's dragging, but I'm getting to it. So let's go. There is an obvious answer. Paperwork is boring. One can describe the ritual surrounding it. One can observe how people talk about or react to it. But when it comes to the paperwork itself, there just aren't that many interesting things one can say about it. How is the form laid out? What about the color scheme? Why did they choose to ask for certain bits of information and not others? Why place of birth and not, say, place where you went to grade school? What's so important about the signature? But even so, even the most imaginative commentator pretty quickly runs out of questions. In fact, one could go further. Paperwork is supposed to be boring, and it's getting more so all the time. Medieval charters were often quite beautiful, full of calligraphy and heraldic embellishments. Even in the 19th century, some of this remained. I have a copy of my grandfather's birth certificate, issued in Springfield, Illinois in 1858, and it's quite colorful, with Gothic letters, scrolls, and little cherubs. It's also written entirely in German. My father's, in contrast, issued in Lawrence, Kansas in 1914, is monochrome and utterly unadorned, just lines and boxes, though they are filled out in a nice florid hand. My own, issued in New York in 1961, lacks even that. It's typed and stamped and utterly without character. But of course, the computer interfaces used for so many forms nowadays are more boring still. It's as if the creators of these documents were gradually trying to strip them of anything even slightly profound or remotely symbolic. It's hardly surprising that all this might drive an anthropologist to despair. Anthropologists are drawn to areas of density. The interpretive tools we have at our disposal are best suited to wend our way through complex webs of meaning or signification. We seek to understand intricate ritual symbolism, social dramas, poetic forms, or kinship networks. What all these have in common is that they tend to be both infinitely rich and at the same time open-ended. If one sought out to exhaust every meaning, motive, or association packed into a single Romanian harvest ritual, or Zandi witchcraft accusation, or Mexican family saga, one could easily spend a lifetime. Quite a number of lifetimes, in fact. If one were also out to trace the fan of relations with our elements in the larger social or symbolic fields, such as invariably opens up. Paperwork, in contrast, is designed to be maximally simple and self-contained. Even when forms are complex, even bafflingly complex, it's by an endless accretion of very simple but apparently contradictory elements. Like a maze composed entirely of the endless juxtaposition of two or three very simple geometrical motifs. And like a maze, paperwork doesn't really open on anything outside itself. As a result, there just isn't very much to interpret. Clifford Geertz became famous for offering a thick description of Balinese cockfights, where he tried to demonstrate that if one were able to unpack everything going on in a given match, one would be able to understand everything about Balinese society, their conceptions of the human condition, of society, hierarchy, nature, all the fundamental passions and dilemmas of human existence. This simply would not be possible to do with a mortgage application, no matter how dense the document itself, and even if some defiant soul set out to write such an analysis, just to prove it could be done, it would be even harder to imagine anyone else actually reading it. One might object, but having great novelists often written compelling literature about bureaucracy? Of course they have, but they have managed to do this with embracing the very circularity and emptiness, not to mention idiocy, of bureaucracy, and producing literary works to partake of something like the same maze-like senseless forms. This is why almost all great literature on the subject takes the form of horror comedy. Franz Kafka's The Trial is of course the paradigm, as is The Castle, but one can cite any number of others, from Stanislaus Lem's memoir found in a bathtub, which is a pretty much straight Kafka, to Ishmael Kundera's Palace of Dreams and Jose Saramago's All the Names, to any number of works that might be said to be informed by the bureaucratic spirit, such as much of Italo Calvino or most anything by Borges. Joseph Heller's Catch-22, which takes on military bureaucracies, and Something Happened about corporate bureaucracies, are considered latter-day masters in the genre, as is David Foster Wallace's unfinished The Pale King, an imaginative meditation on the nature of boredom set in a Midwestern office of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. It's interesting that just about all these works of fiction not only emphasize the comic senselessness of bureaucratic life, but mix it with at least an undertone of violence. This is more obvious in some authors, Kafka and Heller for example, than others, but it almost always seems to be lurking just underneath the surface. What's more, contemporary stories that are explicitly about violence have a tendency to almost become stories about bureaucracy, since after all, most acts of extreme violence either take place in bureaucratic environments, armies, prisons, or else they are almost immediately surrounded by a bureaucratic procedures, crime. So here we're dealing with bureaucracies, and we may have reached a point in human existence where these bureaucracies have outlived their usefulness. We created layers of bureaucracy to create employment and to create things to keep people busy, but I don't think they're enough, and they're not necessary. They're actually making people upset now. They're actually slowing progress. And free people up to do what they need. That's what the UBI is going to do. That's what all these different stimulus packages in different forms are going to do, which is UBI in different forms are going to do. Now, we still must create communities so that we can keep ourselves safe and moving forward, because everybody left to their own accord, if you're just by yourself on an island, you're going to do something detrimental. So when you take away all these bureaucratic jobs and you create a community, you give people the resources, or at least the basic standard of living, then you create a foundation for us to develop real communities. We have to do the work, but the foundation will be laid. And that is the safest way forward. That is the only way forward. I don't think it's exaggerating to say if we don't do that, then you're talking about human oblivion. So, you know what I'm for. I'm not for oblivion. If it comes, it comes, but I'm not for it. I think we could do better. Until next time, try to stay safe, try to stay sane,